Okay, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to see you all here. And unfortunately, for some urgent reasons, I think we could not have Secretary Sir and the MD of SECI to join us for this panel discussion. However, we are thankful to Bohra ji for agreeing to join for this panel discussion. So I think the context here is that the panel context, India has achieved significant progress in its wind energy sector with an installed capacity as presented by Parag about 44 gigawatts and making us the fourth largest in the world. But the target that we have is to get to about 110 gigawatts that Parag presented. So given that context and given that we are currently having a run rate at about 2 to 2.3 gigawatts or 3.5 gigawatts, but to get to 10 gigawatts, that's the context on which we are going to cover this discussion. So I would like to start first with Rajiv in terms of reflecting upon the achievements that we have done in the past and how does he see the collaboration with the government and industry and both at the center as well as the state.
Thanks very much. I'm sure you've asked me to reflect looking at the color of my hair in the back. We did start, my company did start investing in wind energy back in 2006, so we were amongst the first ones. I think there are, as with everything else in life, there are the positives and there are negatives. The early days, obviously, a lot of the investment was backed by tax depreciation first with small investors, and then followed the FIT regime with RPOs. And that, I think, at that time served us well as a country. In a way, the challenge has been that the run rate, very apt in the world of startups, has not really, we have not been able as a country to move it significantly up. 2016-17, as we saw, we had 5.5 gigawatts. But before that, during the FIT regime as well, several years we did 2 to 3, sometimes even 4 gigawatts. And as we have seen in the last few years, we have not been able to really move it up. Now, before we talk about the challenges, which I'm sure will be featured in the panel, if you look at the positive things that have been done, I mean, there have been several things. One thing we always need to remember, of course, is that power is in the concurrent list. And therefore, a lot of the efforts, in a sense, that we see the central government and MNRE take are, in a sense, helping us. And in a way, both of us are working and trying to convince the states to look at the sector in the same way. So what have been the significant changes? I think, to be fair, and I'm sure most of us did not look at it that way when it was first introduced, the TBCB, the tariff-based competitive bidding, was a significant change. First and foremost, that brought in a lot of new investors, big investors. Secondly, moved the size of projects from 50 megawatts to 300 megawatts plus. Had the added advantage, therefore, of seeing tariffs fall. So a bit of win-win all around, and that really was driven by the central government, which we must remember. The second, for those of us who have been in the power sector for a long, long time, that always dogged us, not merely renewables, but also conventional, was the fact that our distribution companies were not making money, and therefore payment security, or actually certainty of payment, was always a challenge. I think the formation of companies like SECI, in more recent years, the LPS scheme, quite frankly, has been revolutionary. I cannot tell you, representing a foreign international investor, the complete change in mood that this has caused. And quite frankly, if we have to move 3x or 4x our historical rate, this was an absolute necessity. Some of the other things, the monthly meetings, the fact that at each stage when we we have a problem, we have the ministry really work with us, have been the good things. So I think a lot of things we need to be proud of, need to be satisfied with, but a sense of lingering underachievement that, for instance, as we have done in solar, where the rate of addition has really gone to another level. Quite frankly, quite as India has. I mean, it's important to remember in the last 10 years, the per capita income of the country has doubled. The size of the grid has more than doubled. So we need really to have done same in the wind as well, but we do have challenges. So I think we can take pride in what we have done, a little bit of glass half full, but then we, with the help of MNRE and all the players, look at how we make the glass half empty full as well. So I'll just stop there.
That's a good reflection, Rajiv. I mean, especially starting from the, feed-in tariff regime to GBI and all that, and what rate we achieved and all. I think all in all, I think you've given a good summary. Taking cue from that, Vipul, I think if you could, do some analysis on the missed opportunities, what could you have done better, and, where are, and some of the things that we could have implemented and, gotten better. So I think we cover this first before going to the next one.
Thanks for putting me on the spot, Shiv. Dekho, no, but I think it's a fair point. I think whether MNRE, whether SECI, whether industry, whether customers, we are all partners in this. So in that spirit, but before I go to what could have worked better in hindsight, 2020 hindsight is always perfect, right? But I do want to underline one or two points that Rajiv very correctly made. I agree with you about the scale of the execution, the way things have ramped up. But I do think there are two or three things that have worked really well. I think one, we should acknowledge and appreciate what technology and supply chain has delivered for us in the wind industry in India. Right? From the 0.1, 0.2, 0.3 megawatt machines. Today I'm happy to say as Sembcorp, thanks to a lot of supply chain partners, yesterday we have commissioned our first 4 megawatt machine in India, the heaviest turbine, the tallest turbine, the heaviest tower in India, right? And if you look at the supply chain that's gone behind that, the fact that we are able to export wind turbines from India today, that is something that has really worked very well, number one. Number two, if I rewind back a few years, as a country, we were not known for speed and clarity in regulation. Today, if I compare ourselves with almost anywhere in the world, especially in renewables or in green hydrogen, etc., the one thing that stands out is we are able to stand in front of anyone in the world and say, here are our rules, and they are done. They are not ideas, they are not discussion documents, these are enacted rules. So I think those two things I really want to put in place. I think in terms of, on reflection in hindsight, if we had to do it all over again, I would point to one factor, which is, should we have kept more guardrails around our bidding framework, around our bidding regime? So we were the first in wind in the world to go for competitive bidding. That's great. The results in terms of cost, etc., for a few years are well known now. But as we are seeing, those costs are sort of coming back up to maybe to where the steady state should have been in the first place. So very much in the spirit of 2020 hindsight, if I look at the very logical, very expected execution bottlenecks that we would have in a country like ours, I think that's where I would have maybe, in hindsight, put some more guardrails. Maybe our bidding became too ruthless. All of us also, as industry, also jumped into it and put lots of, optimism into there. But I think today, perhaps better sense is prevailing, and all around, that's the one thing that I would really point to.
Yeah, thanks, Vipul. Just adding on to what Vipul said, I think there's one distinct difference between our solar projects and wind projects. Winds are definitely far more complicated. I'm sure all of us agree here in this room, the challenges that we face to execute. I think taking a cue from what Vipul said, is in terms of the bidding strategy. I think probably in hindsight that one could also look at is the reverse auction could have been kept out and it could have been just a simple tariff bidding, closed envelope bidding. That would have probably, made a huge difference in hindsight. I would add to that. So coming to you, sir, Bohra sir. In terms of the strategies, because now, as you've seen, that we need to at least do about 10 gigawatts a year and to get to about 110 gigawatts or at least 100 gigawatts by 2030. What kind of steps that maybe need to be taken to increase this from 2 to 4 to 10 gigawatts? And how can stakeholders collaborate to streamline project development process, especially on the financing and execution side that the challenges are getting faced?
Yeah, so like the 50 gigawatt trajectory which we have come out with, I was doing an analysis and I found that it's actually turning out to be, if I take the vanilla wind and solar, and assuming that in FDRE, it's 2:1 or 2.5:1 wind and solar, the trajectory is going up to 70 plus. And that may be the reason that whenever we come out with the vanilla wind bids, we are not finding much of the players. And as my panelist has said, that now it's time for us to rethink and try to modify our bidding system as well. We have done certain changes. But they are needed now, and they are needed at a faster rate because most of the bids and the demand which is going to be in the market will be for FDRE and the RTC. And in all those bids, the wind will be on higher side. We came out with the state-wise bid where we thought that since most of the wind-related infrastructures are limited to certain states which are higher wind, but unfortunately, those bids were not very successful and encouraging. But we'll continue to work on this to see that we have more and more players. We are trying to invite more players into the RLMM so that the supply chain issue, because 10 gigawatt of wind will certainly need an equal amount of supply chain issue. These turbine manufacturers are again looking at the IPPs to see that are they really going to execute the project or it is just a bidding thing. So it's going to be a very interesting game for next 2 to 3 years, I will say. And financing part, I will say that the green finance is going to be the big agenda. The government is very clear in the last budget also and this budget also. They have put a lot of emphasis on the renewable. And the Department of Financial Services, RBI and the MNREs, we have been in continuous touch on various issues to see that how we can ease out the financing. So financing in long run will not be an issue. And we are taking IRIDA into consideration so that the problem with the financial institutions is that they are not aware of the RE project. And few of them have already burned their fingers and therefore they are a lot of skeptical about entering into this field. But with IRIDA support and regular interaction with them, they are also quite positive. So financing issue, I think we will be able to resolve in the long run.
Thank you, sir. And Vipul, now coming on to how do we actually look at the constraints that are there and, in terms of the hindrances that we have to scale up this and how do we actually accelerate transmission development, because that's one of the constraints that we are seeing. Parag also presented in his presentation that we need more transmission where the wind resources are there. And also one of the issues that Parag mentioned is the first time commissioning issues. So these are some of the major constraints. So how do you see and what kind of solutions that we could propose?
I would focus from my perspective, Shiv, on 3 or 4 main issues. Mostly they have been touched on in Parag's presentation earlier, but I think it's worth spending a little time on them.
Yep.
I think first and foremost, at least from my perspective, I would say, is connectivity. To be clear, I think the grid owners, grid operators, CTU has done a fabulous job. Let's recognize that. Frankly, I would count the Indian national power grid as one of the most amazing assets in the world. Not in India, in the world. The fact that it's, 1,500 kilometers or 2,000 kilometers this way, that way, able to move, I don't know what's the right measure, but certainly in excess of 300-400 gigawatts here and there. And the fact that they have now been able to also start to significantly add capacity reasonably quick to keep pace with the industry, I think is very, very creditable. And no matter what happened in terms of the uncertainty on generation, the uncertainty on discoms, this grid was always there for us this was our backbone, right? And so I think the question really is, when you have such a solid backbone that has good systems and is working well, now when much faster response in terms of capacity addition is required, especially for wind. Now that more capacity is needed in shorter time frames, what is going to be the framework to allow them to deliver that? It's fine for us, we can't just say, look, we have significantly increased the number of substations or the capacity per substation. If the requirement as we get to 500 gigawatts or more is much more than that. It's not good enough to say I'm able to now deliver a substation in 3 years if the requirement is to deliver in 18 months. So I think the next round, the next S-curve of how do we deliver that connectivity. And WIPPA has put together a list of suggestions of substations where in the wind zones where we think additional capacity is required and in what time frame. We'd be very happy to come back and sit with MNRE and with anyone else you may invite to sit down and say, look, let's really move this. I think that's number one. I think the second piece is slightly different. Today, if you take out hydro, we are at around plus minus, let's say around 10% of energy from renewables. The national targets are much, much higher than that. So as we start to get to renewable penetration in energy terms to even, let's say, 20-30%, the requirements of the grid in terms of absorbing that, the requirements of the customers in terms of absorbing that. Let's say the last 5 years or so, a lot of the cycling happened by thermal taking the load. Today, with baseload capacity or baseload demand going up, the ability for thermal to back down or the space for thermal to back down may not be there as much as we've had in the past. So then you really need something else to be able to either absorb that or firm it up. Whether that's much more hydro, whether that's much more storage, whether that's much more thermal, whatever it is. All of that capacity then means you have increased end user tariffs that result because of that. And so there was a very good point which Mr. Bhalla also acknowledged in his first remark. I was very happy to hear was that the offtake in terms of RPO has to be put in there. And so what RPO meant in the last 5 years will be very different from what RPO implication will be in the next 5 years. Because now it's not just take the thermal and get the rest of the generation system to absorb it. You're a formal thermal man yourself, Shiv. And so I think the way we think about RPO in the context of 20-30% penetration of renewables or more, we have to rethink that framework and be able to have the discoms get the ability to pass on a different level of tariffs, to absorb a different level of cyclicality, or to firm it up. I think that's the second piece. I think the third part I would talk about is, I go back to Mr. Bohra's numbers. We've got, let's say we are able to do 10 gigawatts a year of wind bidding. That doesn't include green hydrogen. That doesn't include CNI. So who will have their own aspirations, we are already seeing, Arvind is here as one of the leading CNI players. You know this very well. The size and complexity of bids coming up in CNI today is much more. And so probably from a pure wind capacity perspective, my own feeling is it may not even be it certainly won't be 50, it may not even be 70, it may even be higher. Now, if you talk about, let's say, somewhere between 70 and 90 gigawatts in the next 6 years, of which we're already in the first year, right? The physical availability of land and site rights itself, we have to now rethink that. Again, Parag covered some of this in his remarks around the micrositing rules, around the access, etc., etc. But to me, the scale of what we are now looking at, less than 2 gigs a year, and we all know what problems we are having on sites. We all know it. Everyone in this room knows it. You make that 5 times, you understand what happens annually. You make that 8 times or 9 times or 10 times per year. Let's say you get to 15 gigs a year or something like that. The physical execution challenges, we do need a different framework to access land. We need a different, more disciplined framework to, once someone says, okay, I'm building here, how do you keep that land or that wind resource for that project proponent without allowing squatting? To me, that is really the third thing. The fourth one I would just literally mention, you talked about the first-time commissioning issues. I think, to be frank, let's not reinvent the wheel here. This has been solved in other countries. Maybe the simple thing that we need some temporary relaxation to allow it's not good to have projects, to have assets standing and not commissioned. Some temporary relaxation on a conditional basis. But then, if we are able to, if the IPPs are willing to absorb the commercial implications of being, let's say, at 99% or being at 98%, rather than being at highest ever in the last 25 years, and in any case, forecasts are being given for the energy. So the only hit really is to the IPP. So if the IPP is absorbing that, let the IPP absorb that. And maybe there seems to be some room for I think, a little bit more balanced approach to this FTC issue. I would just leave it at that.
Yeah, no, thanks, Vipul. I think you covered it quite well. I think, as you mentioned in your solutions, I think part of WIPPA, we will provide those requirements officially to the ministry so that, we can take it up. And I think immediate need is some kind of a temporary relaxation, which you mentioned on the FTC side, so that we are able to at least get the commissionings done, because machines are up and ready, I guess, and we need immediate commissioning of those things. Moving on now to Rajiv, I think, we need to look at some of the global experiences that we have, more specifically with China, the kind of scales that they have done. Are there anything that, we could think in terms of the practices or approaches that China has taken specifically in terms of, how we could emulate or see what is good there, that we could look at driving this growth? And also, are there any other innovative solutions that come to your mind that you would like to throw your light upon?
So, well, from my shareholders, I certainly know a little bit about China and Australia. Now, the challenge with China is it is obviously incredibly impressive if you just look at the numbers. I'm not sure, however, I would recommend any of those necessarily solutions. So, what happens in China? First and foremost, unlike in our country, the capacity addition is bottoms up there. So each province has their own target. They just go ahead and get it done. It takes 8 months to complete wind facility to come up, because the entire land is owned by, I assume, the Communist Party. There is no question of rights of way. Otherwise, you'll have a right of way to Siberia or wherever it is that they send. But at one level, it's incredibly impressive. The ability of the Chinese state to deliver infrastructure at scale in a short period of time is really unparalleled in human history, I would say. Now, they have found their own solutions. There is no tariff bidding, because you get in each part of the country, you get the coal benchmark tariff. So that thing is out of the way. Now, my company's shareholders, we get projects in China simply because it's FDI. So it's foreign direct investment, therefore they get it. You can't really compete with others. The third aspect is that the entire sector is dominated by SOEs, the state-owned enterprises. So China renewable wind projects get interest rates of 3 to 4%, which is cheaper than Hong Kong, because each of the banks are also SOEs. Most of the lenders are SOEs. So, these are, so my mind boggles at what China does. The problem is I can't really see or even recommend many of those solutions to a democracy like ours. However, it's easy to dismiss China on the ground that we are a democracy. I'm sure there is still plenty for us to learn. Their planning processes. What else can we do? I mean, certainly, what we call, or this government has called for the last 10 years, and on which a lot has been done, ease of doing business. There is a lot we can do. I mean, we talk about the sensitivity of the private sector acquiring farmers' land, agricultural lands or private lands. In our experience, my company's experience here, bigger challenges has been with the state government-owned lands, because since it belongs to the state, any number of people have encroached upon it without any restriction. And so the issues at the ground is something that we can certainly improve. I'm not sure necessarily what China does can be replicated. Each province over there, for instance, is judged on the amount of investment they have brought in. Now, could we, for instance, I know it's way outside my pay range, but could we make the DCs or district magistrates responsible for whatever projects in some ways or form? One of the challenges we have of a central run system, which has seen great outcomes like SECI, like our payments actually being made, for instance. So, but it's a mixed bag. What tends to happen is you might be building a project in Maharashtra, but you're selling to Jharkhand. In a sense, the local state doesn't necessarily, other than the general economic development, the indirect jobs and so on, doesn't really see a direct stake in that project in the manner that it used to be when you are, so if I have a coal-fired power plant like my company does in Haryana, I can go and meet the chief minister because 30% of Haryana's power is supplied by that one coal-fired power plant. So they see a vested interest in your asset actually being productive. They may not care about how much money you make, but they see a vested interest in that project being successful in a particular state. That is not the case in a system where development comes from the center. So some of these things, we can look at the output that China produces, but see how we can perhaps achieve the same outcome in a more democratic system. Obviously, no one will say that the party or the center should own 100% of the country's land and arbitrarily allocate to whoever it wants. Now, one point Vipul made and you made, and we all recognize, and every time we meet, without the joint secretaries or secretaries, we always talk about how we have gone mad, cut each other's feet. We were all smoking something which was illegal when we made the bid, and so on and so forth. But an important term, Vipul, you used was guardrails. And that struck with me because in some ways, a system like China does have guardrails. They do it in the form of having, in a way it's very opaque. You don't quite know when you get an allocation and can't explain why you don't. But they do take into account, what is the supply chain situation, how much money the particular investor has. In the case of SOEs, how much other jobs they are going to create. So somehow they have their own guardrails. And perhaps that's another thing. I don't have a straightforward answer. Where we could think of some guardrails which are consistent with a market-driven, private sector-led democratic society, but still prevents this kind of situation where many of us made a lot of bids which we had no real, as someone from SECI one explained to me, he no longer works for SECI, I hasten to add, that what you guys have done is not really won bids, you have bought options. Agar paisa kam hua, equipment price, to karenge, nahi hua, to nahi karenge. So that has been frustrating for the government as well. So that's another lesson that we could perhaps learn is could we bring some guardrails. Now, a couple of other things going outside China. in Australia, I mean, obviously the ability of the consumer to pay tariff there is very high. So the decarbonization plan is really built on, so what you bid for instance, if you have a battery storage plant, my shareholders have a coal-fired power plant which is meant to be closed in 2028 and replaced by a large battery facility, which importantly retains all the jobs. So that has been one of their conditions. But in such situations, what they do is, in a sense, they do their own reverse bid. You bid for how much support you need from the federal government or the state government so that you can build it, and the least amount of support asked for goes. So, but they have the money, I guess. So in a sense, it's more followable for us if we can afford it. It's a democracy. It has all the challenges that democracies have, including a federal and state system, which sometimes don't always work together. But they have found that way. Finally, one other thing I would say, two other things. Sorry, I'm from Bihar. Once you give me the mic, you can't take it back from me. One of the things I think we should also recognize, those of us who have participated in the industry for long, and that's nothing to do with either state government or central government, is, truth be told, hand on heart, none of our wind projects over the last 15 years have actually performed in terms of output as over a large period of time as we had hoped. So there is something in that science that we haven't quite gotten right. That I haven't seen in other countries. The output is pretty well forecastable. Whether climate change is affecting our country disproportionately, I don't know, but it has not been successful. And the final point I would make is that if many of the reform measures that the government is planning to bring in, for instance, time of the day tariff, that will help the distribution companies as well, together with FDRE, to not only look at the marginal tariff of infirm energy, rather than the system cost of that energy, and the graph that Parag had shown about the afternoon duck curve, and that will help, I think, in the acceptability of wind energy a lot more than we have so far seen. So I don't know whether I answered your question, but that's what I have seen in other parts of Asia Pacific, at least.
No, thank you, Rajiv. That was quite useful in terms of what you explained based on your global and especially being exposed to a large company which has large exposure on that part of the world. I do, agree with you in terms of what is done there straight away can't be implemented here because we are complete. The way we function, the way we run our country are completely different. But at the same time, I think there are opportunities, and at least, the biggest thing that we as a country and in ministry have seen now is the regular interaction. At least all the issues are getting heard on a day-to-day basis. We may be getting resolutions on time, we may not be getting, but at least there is a forum, there is a way things are happening now. And just one comment on your performance of the wind turbines. I think that's something which collectively all of us need to look at it in terms of whether it is the way we are looking at the WRA in terms of losses and other things, what we actually predict compared to what the global companies are doing, or is the weather impacting this part of the continent much more than other areas? That's something I think we as industry players need to internally look at it. Sir, moving on finally to you with, how do you actually see the significance of our onshore, offshore wind turbines, and how do you see now the capacity coming up, and in terms of policy regulatory, what is that we could expect from the ministry? And now, since you will be in the driving seat here for us, so would like to hear from you, sir, and then close this.
Before that, what Rajiv has raised the issue of China and how we can replicate that. So obviously we have our own challenges, being the democracy where elections are held every year in one corner of the other corner. But we have seen in other infrastructure project where portal like PMG portal or Pragati portal and other portals, where the projects are being monitored, especially the projects of NHAI, projects of railway, the transmission projects are being monitored at the highest level. and the issues are getting resolved. It may not be as faster as in the other countries, but yes, a mechanism has been developed. And you see all these mechanisms has their advantage that they get refined over a period of time. So certainly we can always look on those issues, because now with 10 gigawatt of wind, we are planning to induct into the system. All those issues of land and other things are bound to come, and they are bound to come in a larger way. So it is a right time when the WIPPA, MNRE and other stakeholders come out with some sort of a system where we can keep on monitoring the projects also and what are the issue faced at the state level. So that is something which is possible. Uh, Coming to the offshore wind area, uh, offshore wind already we have a big target. We have given our strategy paper also. And as promised, we came out with our NIT on the 1st of the Feb, which we promised in the month of September. And we will certainly try to come out with our bid for the VGF by either end of this month or in the first week, because it has been already announced by the Honorable Finance Minister. There are certain paperwork which are going on, and once things are there, we do acknowledge that being a first project, it will take time, and the industry will also try to understand them. So maybe 2 to 3 rounds of the pre-bid meetings will be needed, and that will be the time when you see we will be in the code of conduct time. So like we can do all those kind of negotiations and understanding the requirement of the industries. But yes, offshore wind is going to be a big area, especially in the Tamil Nadu. And Gujarat VGF is something which is we will release by end of this month or maybe in a first week. And let's see how the response comes. But in the long run, with our coastline of more than 7,000 kilometer, we do have a huge potential. And we have discussions with the turbine manufacturers also. We had a discussion because offshore wind has been an area where we have been discussion with a lot of international players and the governments as well. And they are looking at India as an alternative source of supply. So I'll say that for the industry, it's a big opportunity. Maybe in terms of reducing the cost, because they still feel that this is one area where, unlike the solar PV, where the China has completely dominated the supply chain, this supply chain is still not dominated by China. And they look at India as an alternate supply source, provided we step in and fill those gaps. So it's a big opportunity for us. And finger crossed, we are expecting that we should be able to do that.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Just, yeah, Vipul, you want to add something?
I just, I want to go back to a point that Rajiv had made, but you go ahead first.
No, why don't you finish that, then I'll wrap up.
Okay, thanks. No, I just want to, to this point about what can we learn from other places and what can we do that works in our system, that works in our environment. One thing I do want to put out as an idea or as a suggestion, and definitely do it while Mr. Bohra is here as food for thought. Our competitive bidding has brought in cost savings on a tariff basis and transparency. So we don't want to get away with that. But at the same time, it has somehow subjected MNRE as well as the industry to this tyranny of the bids. Bid round 1, bid round 2, bid round 3, now you're preparing. So the amount of activity and the amount of, therefore, repeated assumptions, etc., that go into the bid. Can we, in the context that we are now thinking about at least 5 times the volume, just tweaking the bidding is, you can't say, now I'll do a bid every 3 days. Okay, I'll reduce the time available from 4 weeks to 2 weeks to 1 week. That's not practically possible. Is it possible to have a different regime where we balance the requirement of competitive, transparent price discovery, as well as almost a free rein for how much volume people want to add. What I mean is the following. Can we do something where we say, look, we'll have a competitive bidding once every 6 months. That price is then, and maybe it's different for different states or whatever it is. That price, anyone up to a cap of, let's say, 5 gigawatts, 10 gigawatts who wants to add at that price, it's now competitively discovered, come and add. To me, the real learning from what Rajiv was describing was that the ability to say, look, I know what is the price, I know this is the volume that's demanded, which was a benefit of the feed-in tariff regime. Anyone who says, I can build up to that much at this price, I take a call. If I'm able to build, I go ahead and build. Rather than saying, acha, abhi main 200 kar leta hoon, next time I'll try, acha, 200 nahi, I'll try 300, chalo, I'll try, and then I'll figure out whether I can do or not do. Maybe there's a different way to look at it. Get once in 6 month price discovery, and then for the next 6 months, just open it up to anyone who says, I'm willing to commit a volume. Obviously, in that also, squatting will have to be examined, etc., etc. But maybe it's time for, because we are talking about 5 times. We are not talking about going from 1.7 gigs to 2 gigs a year. We are talking about going to 10, maybe 15.
No, you are absolutely right, Vipul. But only one important stakeholder in this approach is actually the states. Absolutely. So what is actually required is to, with the RPO, profile being given, I think if MNRE along with Ministry of Power could get all the states to give year-wise their committed offtake and the tariff acceptable to them, I think if that can be achieved, then I think growth is not an issue. But the most important thing, sir, in this execution, which you rightly pointed out, why some of the national important projects are getting attention and getting resolved, because I was the MD and CEO for Hyderabad Metro, and I've attended a lot of Pragati meetings, which was conducted by Prime Minister himself or Cabinet Secretary. One of the two used to be there in the meetings, and used to have the relevant people from the states attending to those meetings, and those meetings were extremely fruitful, unbelievable. All issues would get resolved, and if they're not resolved in the next meeting, then there's to be a lot of issues. So I think something on a similar line, we don't need project-wise, but at least if we could get an implementation on issues, for example, land, connectivity, transmission, right-of-way, and other such issues on state-wise, at least once in a quarter, might really help us to drive the required states' attention to those issues. I think that might actually be a game changer in terms of handling the execution changes. Just increase the profile of those meetings and have the relevant chief minister or the energy minister participating with the necessary secretariat, both from the center and the state. That, in my view, might be a game changer, because all these national important projects have happened only because of the drive and focus at the highest possible level. So that was one of the things, probably could really help us, because I myself have been a direct witness to the effects of those meetings. So all in all, I think thanks very much, Vipul, Bohra sir, Rajiv, for the useful. I'm sure the audience would have liked and got a lot of insight into this, and we look forward to working with Bohraji more closely now, because he is our Karta Dharta now. Thank you, everyone. Oh, Q&A. Okay. We'll open up the this thing for any question and answer from the audience. Any questions from anyone from the audience? Yeah, Chintan, you should say the question and the answer too.
Answer also, Chintan bhai.
Yeah, a lot of debate is going around in terms of how this entire power sector is getting unfolded, essentially on the distribution reform side. And we also know one thing is the demand charge of the consumer today is not truly reflective of the fixed cost of the distribution company. So maybe a time will come in the future where the demand charges of the consumer will go up, so that you can have further unbundling at distribution level. But this idea over here is bulk of the distribution companies today are a little bit wary about signing a 25-year PPA. Because this is something is on the card. Something is going to happen of unbundling on the buyers and the trading part. Would it make a great sense to have to push for a 2-part tariff in wind? something on the similar lines of hydro. I would say notional, not exactly fixed cost and variable cost, because everything is fixed cost in wind. But in hydro, you have almost like 50-50 in terms of the entire tariff is broken into two parts, fixed and the variable part. The advantage will be that the fixed cost still will be paid, and the fixed cost is what needs to be recovered by the distribution company, part of the contracted capacity. This may change this entire game for the future to have a longer PPAs, because that's another issue that is now coming up, where we see that there's a resistance from the distribution company on longer term PPA. So this is more of a question of philosophical thing. Can there be a two-part tariff for both wind and solar, including hybrid?
Yeah, I think part of it is actually covered in Parag's presentation of having some kind of variability in the wind tariff, but I think you are actually moving towards the next step in terms of making it a two-part bid. I don't know, Bohraji, what would be your views? Because I think from our industry perspective, we would always like to have something better. Till mange more.
You see, uh, we have been thinking of, in fact, we are planning to have a study done, what Parag has said in his presentation. Before that, only the process has started. We are trying to understand that how we can link the tariff of wind with the fluctuations in the market. However, you see, it need to be very clearly defined, and this algorithm need to be changed at a regular interval, because the tariff does not include only the cost of the raw material. It depends upon what are the overall perceptions of the country when somebody come and invest here. So financing cost, financing risk also becomes a part. And those are some things which are not measurable in the correct sense. But however, yes, we are trying to see that how we can do it. And one more thought which, like it's in the process only, that why not go for a tariff which keep on increasing over a period of time, because we as a country is growing, and our industry, if they get a cheaper electricity at the start of their business, then it's easier for them to competitive, and once they grow over a period of time, they are in a position to sustain the higher electricity tariff. So all those ideas are there. We are working it, and we will certainly like the industry to come out with those solutions. So we are obviously open, and we have already started working on one or two ideas, which even I had when I started looking after the wind.
Thank you, sir. I think we'll make a formal proposal, Chintan. Any more questions?
Sir, this is it. I'm Rakesh Rathore from JSW Energy, sir. One a simple capacity addition which is happening through merchants is by the way of CFD arrangements. So, which is contract for difference.
Can you just repeat? I think we didn't get your
Yeah, I'm Rakesh Rathore from JSW Energy. And the suggestion was that a lot of capacity addition is happening across the countries is through CFD arrangements. So the generation is not tied up with Discom, and it's left to the merchant. And basically developer is provided a CFD guarantee from the government, so that the pool which is going from the government is very minuscule in terms of, and they might receive it from that arrangement also, from the developer and from the market receives. So anything on that aspects which actually broaden the market space in terms of broadening the merchant space, and a free, basically it can be a revenue model to that extent. So anything on that ground maybe.
So I think if I have understood your question correctly, I mean, you're talking about establishing merchant plants or the plants which have a PPA interim?
So I think if I get you right, this happens in many developed markets where you don't have a long-term PPA with a specific off-taker. You sell it on the wholesale market, but because each investor needs You can't get it financed until you have the guaranteed tariff. You can buy contracts for differences, so that for the generator, the price is fixed, and yet you don't necessarily have to sell it to the market. My own perspective in that, and there are many people here who know a lot more than me, certainly in the audience and on the stage. But there is no doubt that at some point, as our electricity markets liberalize further, that will come. Speaking about today, when we are talking about going from 1.7 on average to 10, if we ourselves consider what is it that has prevented us, I think with due respect that will come fairly low down the order. What has prevented us is actually the implementation challenges on the ground, that of evacuation, that of land acquisition, the fact that we only have 3 turbine suppliers at the moment who are really active in the country, and so on and so forth, things about financing. So that will definitely help as the amount of merchant energy on the grid grows. My sense, however, is that that is not really the factor that has so far stopped us from going to 10 gigawatts a year. I don't know whether you agree, or Vipul, what your experience is, or others in the hall.
Just to add to that, I think there are players who are actually being able to set up plants now on a merchant basis without having long-term PPAs, and are able to, set up and also do the financing arrangements. So it's only a question of, whether you are able to convince the required lending agencies about the strategy you have and what kind of, confidence that you can, or credibility that you can demonstrate. I guess, Arvind, that should be right, I guess. Any other questions? Yeah, UB. I think someone give a mic to UB.
UB is like Chintan. He should ask the question and give the answer, both.
He's a veteran.
Thank you, sir. So more than a question, there's an observation. Maybe, sir, JS, sir, maybe it's for your understanding. Sir, today, like on one hand, we talk about the tariffs and acceptability of this tariff with the discount. So, for example, in wind, anything around above 350, it is seen as a red flag, and discoms are not willing to buy this. On the other hand, today what is happening, like, a lot of crowding of projects are happening in states like Rajasthan. Now, because there's a lot of projects that are coming up in Rajasthan, and CTV is forced to actually go for HVDC transmission lines. Now, on one side, like, okay, we set up a project in Rajasthan, and maybe the tariff discovered could be 250, 260, and Discom would see this on the face of it that they're buying power at 260. But what happens to the cost of HVDC systems that are getting installed? And is it not getting socialized across the country? Now, if you take that cost of socialization, it's not 260, actually it could be something close to 5 rupees that the Discom is buying. Now, when that being the case, it's always better to distribute the projects across the country with normal transmission lines, not going for HVDCs, and cost of that power would be cheaper than actually crowding the projects in one state. So this is one thing, and maybe I have other second point is like just to answer what Chintan was talking about on the single part versus two-part tariff for wind. I would say like two-part tariff for renewables is not a good idea in my opinion. I would be differing from what Chintan has said. In hydro, the life expectancy of a project is say 50 years or even 100 years. So it works well for a hydro project, but for wind our expectancy is 20-25 years. So it may not actually work to have a two-part tariff. Now incidentally, I understand there are hydro projects where India is buying power from northeastern states or even from Bhutan. The tariff is up to 15 rupees. So if the government is willing to pay such tariffs for renewables in the starting years, then two-part tariff will work. But I don't think nobody will pay us that high tariffs. So from that point of view, I would say single-part tariff is more safer and bankable for renewables. Okay, and first observation is more important, sir. Maybe if you could address that, so the delivered cost of energy to the consumer. If you calculate, then I think a lot of things will get clear.
Yeah. So, like, what I have an observation on the wind sector is that I compare the wind sector with the hydro sector. So the hydro is not available in every state and wind is not available in every state. So if you put an RPO requirement on every state, that yes, you have to have so much of the electrons from the wind, and then you doesn't have a wind resource there, so how will that RPO work? And in case of, say, let's assume that we do away with the RPO and we just go for the normal installations. So in those 8 windy states, they also have a limited number of capacity to absorb the wind resource. And that will be the upper limit. After that, there cannot be any expansion of the wind projects in the country, even if they have a capacity. So somewhere we have to assure the other states that, look, the power is being generated in that state, but you can take it. So I think till the industry to grow up in the initial stage, and as one of my fellow panelists was saying that the way the policies are changing, so the policies are not static. But we feel that initially to encourage the wind sectors, it is essential that we let the projects come in the area where it is cheaper. And once the market grow up and the adaptability of the tariffs increases in the discoms and the consumers, then automatically we may not do away with this thing. But as of now, I feel that this is not the time to go for this thing.
Thank you, sir. Okay, last question.
Hello. Thank you, Shiv. Sir, I have a small suggestion. See, what we have seen in bids, typically there's a delay because of so many reasons you people know better than me. But there's no incentive to commission a project earlier. Rather than I'll put it in this way, there is a disincentive. For example, in lot of bids, I have to give a 0.75 the PPA rate, whatever I has bidded. Okay. So this actually does not encourage the developer to commission a little early. In roads, if you see Mr. Gadkari has implemented a lot of good initiatives where they incentivize if a project comes little earlier than what it is. Anyways, you will have a 25 years PPA with the discoms. So unless we have an incentive there, I think so if you can put it in the bid key, maybe 1.25 times they will give the discom, or the developer is given a right to sell it in the exchange for the early commissioning. And if you give a little more incentive, I think so people will be motivated to commission the project a little earlier and they will put the capex more little earlier. That's one suggestion from my side.
Yeah, okay, noted. I think we have raised it already in one of the monthly meetings. So it's already there with the MNRE as a suggestion from the industry. I guess we are done with our time. Thank you very much, everyone.
An excellent discussion on India's wind energy ecosystem. Thank you, panelists, for not only your straight talk, but also for sharing your aspirations for the road ahead. Together, we will be able to take India to its wind and renewable energy goals. Request Mr. Mahesh Vipradas, WIPPA's Vice President and Vice President at Sembcorp. No, sir, please don't leave the stage, sir. Sir, 1 second. Yeah. Request Mr. Mahesh Vipradas, WIPPA's Vice President and Vice President at Sembcorp, to present our panelists with a token of gratitude. group photo of this excellent panel. A group photo?